was once a queen who had a little daughter, still too young to run alone. One day the child was very troublesome, and the mother could not quiet it, do what she would. She grew impatient, and seeing the ravens flying round the castle, she opened the window and said, "I wish you were a raven and would fly away. Then I should have a little peace." Scarcely were the words out of her mouth when the child in her arms was turned into a raven and flew away from her through the open window. The bird took its flight to a dark wood and remained there for a long time, and meanwhile the parents could hear nothing of their child. Long after this, a man was making his way through the wood when he heard a raven calling, and he followed the sound of the voice. As he drew near, the raven said, "I am by birth a king's daughter, but am now under the spell of some enchantment. You can, however, set me free." "What am I to do?" he asked. She replied, "Go farther into the wood until you come to a house, wherein lives an old woman. She will offer you food and drink, but you must not take of either. If you do, you will fall into a deep sleep and will not be able to help me. In the garden behind the house is a large tan heap, and on that you must stand and watch for me. I shall drive there in my carriage at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for 3 successive days. The first day it will be drawn by 4 white, second by 4 chestnut, and the last by 4 black horses. But if you fail to keep awake, and I find you sleeping, I shall not be set free." The man promised to do all that she wished, but the raven said, "Alas, I know even now that you will take something from the woman and be unable to save me." The man assured her again that he would on no account touch a thing to eat or drink. When he came to the house and went inside, the old woman met him and said, "Poor man, how tired you are. Come in and rest, and let me give you something to eat and drink." "No," answered the man, "I will neither eat nor drink." But she would not leave him alone, and urged him, saying, "If you will not eat anything, at least you might take a draught of wine. 1 drink counts for nothing." And at last he allowed himself to be persuaded, and drank. As it drew towards the appointed hour, he went outside into the garden and mounted the tan heap to await the raven. Suddenly a feeling of fatigue came over him, and unable to resist it, he lay down for a little while, fully determined, however, to keep awake. But in another minute his eyes closed of their own accord, and he fell into such a deep sleep that all the noises in the world would not have awakened him. At 2 o'clock the raven came driving along, drawn by her 4 white horses. But even before she reached the spot, she said to herself, sighing, "I know he has fallen asleep." When she entered the garden, there she found him as she had feared, lying on the tan heap, fast asleep. She got out of her carriage and went to him. She called him and shook him, but it was all in vain. He still continued sleeping. The next day at noon, the old woman came to him again with food and drink, which he at first refused. At last, overcome by her persistent entreaties that he would take something, he lifted the glass and drank again. Towards 2 o'clock, he went into the garden and on to the tan heap to watch for the raven. He had not been there long before he began to feel so tired that his limbs seemed hardly able to support him, and he could not stand upright any longer. So again he lay down and fell fast asleep. As the raven drove along her 4 chestnut horses, she said sorrowfully to herself, "I know he has fallen asleep." She went as before to look for him, but he slept, and it was impossible to awaken him. The following day, the old woman said to him, "What is this? You are not eating or drinking anything. Do you want to kill yourself?" He answered, "I may not, and will not either eat or drink." But she put down the dish of food and the glass of wine in front of him, and when he smelt the wine, he was unable to resist the temptation and took a deep draught. When the hour came round again, he went as usual on to the tan heap in the garden to await the king's daughter. But he felt even more overcome with weariness than on the 2 previous days, and throwing himself down, he slept like a log. At 2 o'clock the raven could be seen approaching, and this time her coachman and everything about her, as well as her horses, were black. She was sadder than ever as she drove along, and said mournfully, "I know he has fallen asleep and will not be able to set me free." She found him sleeping heavily, and all her efforts to awaken him were of no avail. Then she placed beside him a loaf and some meat, and a flask of wine of such a kind that however much he took of them, they would never grow less. After that, she drew a gold ring on which her name was engraved off her finger and put it upon one of his. Finally, she laid a letter near him, in which, after giving him particulars of the food and drink she had left for him, she finished with the following words: "I see that as long as you remain here you will never be able to set me free. If, however, you still wish to do so, come to the golden castle of Stromberg. This is well within your power to accomplish." She then returned to her carriage and drove to the golden castle of Stromberg. When the man awoke and found that he had been sleeping, he was grieved at heart and said, "She has no doubt been here and driven away again, and it is now too late for me to save her." Then his eyes fell on the things which were lying beside him. He read the letter and knew from it all that had happened. He rose up without delay, eager to start on his way and to reach the castle of Stromberg, but he had no idea in which direction he ought to go. He traveled about a long time in search of it, and came at last to a dark forest through which he went on walking for 14 days, and still could not find a way out. Once more the night came on, and worn out he lay down under a bush and fell asleep. Again, the next day he pursued his way through the forest, and that evening, thinking to rest again, he lay down as before, but he heard such a howling and wailing that he found it impossible to sleep. He waited till it was darker, and people had begun to light up their houses, and then seeing a little glimmer ahead of him, he went towards it. He found that the light came from a house which looked smaller than it really was, from the contrast of its height with that of an immense giant who stood in front of it. He thought to himself, "If the giant sees me going in, my life will not be worth much." However, after a while, he summoned up courage and went forward. When the giant saw him, he called out, "It is lucky for that you have come, for I have not had anything to eat for a long time. I can have you now for my supper." "I would rather you let that alone," said the man, "for I do not willingly give myself up to be eaten. If you are wanting food, I have enough to satisfy your hunger." "If that is so," replied the giant, "I will leave you in peace. I only thought of eating you because I had nothing else." So they went indoors together and sat down, and the man brought out the bread, meat, and wine, which although he had eaten and drunk of them, were still unconsumed. The giant was pleased with the good cheer, and ate and drank to his heart's content. When he had finished his supper, the man asked him if he could direct him to the castle of Stromberg. The giant said, "I will look on my map. On it are marked all the towns, villages, and houses." So he fetched his map and looked for the castle, but could not find it. "Never mind," he said. "I have larger maps upstairs in the cupboard. We will look on those." But they searched in vain, for the castle was not marked even on these. The man now thought he should like to continue his journey, but the giant begged him to remain for a day or two longer, until the return of his brother, who was away in search of provisions. When the brother came home, they asked him about the castle of Stromberg, and he told them he would look on his own maps as soon as he had eaten and appeased his hunger. Accordingly, when he had finished his supper, they all went up together to his room and looked through his maps, but the castle was not to be found. Then he fetched other older maps, and they went on looking for the castle until at last they found it, but it was many thousand miles away. "How shall I be able to get there?" asked the man. "I have 2 hours to spare," said the giant, "and I will carry you into the neighborhood of the castle. I must then return to look after the child who is in our care." Giant thereupon carried the man to within about 100 leagues of the castle, where he left him, saying, "You will be able to walk the remainder of the way yourself." The man journeyed on day and night till he reached the golden castle of Stromberg. He found it situated, however, on a glass mountain, and looking up from the foot, he saw the enchanted maiden drive round her castle, and then go inside. He was overjoyed to see her, and longed to get to the top of the mountain, but the sides were so slippery that every time he attempted to climb, he fell back again. When he saw that it was impossible to reach her, he was greatly grieved and said to himself, "I will remain here and wait for her." So he built himself a little hut, and there he sat and watched for a whole year. And every day he saw the king's daughter driving round her castle, but still was unable to get nearer to her. Looking out from his hut one day, he saw 3 robbers fighting, and he called out to them, "God be with you." They stopped when they heard the call, but looking round and seeing nobody, they went on again with their fighting, which now became more furious. "God be with you," he cried again, and again they paused and looked about, but seeing no one went back to their fighting. A third time he called out, "God be with you," and then thinking he should like to know the cause of dispute between the 3 men, he went out and asked them why they were fighting so angrily with one another. One of them said that he had found a stick, and that he had but to strike it against any door through which he wished to pass, and it immediately flew open. Another told him that he had found a cloak which rendered its wearer invisible, and the third had caught a horse which would carry its rider over any obstacle and even up the glass mountain. They had been unable to decide whether they would keep together and have the things in common, or whether they would separate. On hearing this, the man said, "I will give you something in exchange for those 3 things, not money, for that I have not got, but something that is of far more value. I must first, however, prove whether all you have told me about your 3 things is true." The robbers, therefore, made him get on the horse and handed him the stick and the cloak, and when he had put this round him, he was no longer visible. Then he fell upon them with the stick and beat them one after another, crying, "There, you idle vagabonds! You have got what you deserve. Are you satisfied now?" After this, he rode up the glass mountain. When he reached the gate of the castle, he found it closed, but he gave it a blow with his stick, and it flew wide open at once, and he passed through. He mounted the steps and entered the room where the maiden was sitting, with a golden goblet full of wine in front of her. She could not see him, for he still wore his cloak. He took the ring which she had given him off his finger and threw it into the goblet, so that it rang as it touched the bottom. "That is my own ring," she exclaimed, "and if that is so, the man must also be here who is coming to set me free." She sought for him about the castle, but could find him nowhere. Meanwhile, he had gone outside again and mounted his horse and thrown off the cloak. When therefore she came to the castle gate, she saw him and cried aloud for joy. Then he dismounted and took her in his arms, and she kissed him and said, "Now you have indeed set me free." There was a man who had 3 sons, the youngest of whom was called Dummling, and was despised, mocked, and sneered at on every occasion. It happened that the eldest wanted to go into the forest to hew wood, and before he went, his mother gave him a beautiful sweet cake and a bottle of wine, in order that he might not suffer from hunger or thirst. When he entered the forest, he met a little gray-haired old man who bade him good day and said, "Do give me a piece of cake out of your pocket, and let me have a draught of your wine. I am so hungry and thirsty." But the clever son answered, "If I give you my cake and wine, I shall have none for myself. Be off with you." And he left the little man standing and went on. But when he began to hew down a tree, it was not long before he made a false stroke, and the axe cut him in the arm, so that he had to go home and have it bound up. And this was the little gray man's doing. After this, the second son went into the forest, and his mother gave him, like the eldest, a cake and a bottle of wine. The little old gray man met him likewise, and asked him for a piece of cake and a drink of wine. But the second son, too, said sensibly enough, "What I give you will be taken away from myself. Be off." And he left the little man standing and went on. His punishment, however, was not delayed. When he had made a few blows at the tree, he struck himself in the leg, so that he had to be carried home. Then Dummling said, "Father, do let me go and cut wood." The father answered, "Your brothers have hurt themselves with it. Leave it alone. You do not understand anything about it." But Dummling begged so long that at last he said, "Just go then. You will get wiser by hurting yourself." His mother gave him a cake made with water and baked in the cinders, and with it a bottle of sour beer. When he came to the forest, the little old gray man met him likewise, and greeting him said, "Give me a piece of your cake and a drink out of your bottle. I am so hungry and thirsty." Dummling answered, "I have only cinder cake and sour beer. If that pleases you, we will sit down and eat." So they sat down, and when Dummling pulled out his cinder cake, it was a fine sweet cake, and the sour beer had become good wine. So they ate and drank, and after that the little man said, "Since you have a good heart and are willing to divide what you have, I will give you good luck. There stands an old tree, cut it down, and you will find something at the roots." Then the little man took leave of him. Dummling went and cut down the tree, and when it fell, there was a goose sitting in the roots with feathers of pure gold. He lifted her up, and taking her with him, went to an inn where he thought he would stay the night. Now the host had 3 daughters who saw the goose and were curious to know what such a wonderful bird might be, and would have liked to have one of its golden feathers. The eldest thought, "I shall soon find an opportunity of pulling out a feather," and as soon as Dummling had gone out, she seized the goose by the wing, but her finger and hand remained sticking fast to it. The second came soon afterwards, thinking only of how she might get a feather for herself. But she had scarcely touched her sister than she was held fast. At last the third also came with the like intent, and the others screamed out, "Keep away, for goodness sake, keep away." But she did not understand why she was to keep away. "The others are there," she thought. "I may as well be there too," and ran to them. But as soon as she had touched her sister, she remained sticking fast to her. So they had to spend the night with the goose. The next morning, Dummling took the goose under his arm and set out, without troubling himself about the 3 girls who were hanging on to it. They were obliged to run after him continually, now left, now right, wherever his legs took him. In the middle of the fields, the parson met them, and when he saw the procession, he said, "For shame, you good-for-nothing girls. Why are you running across the fields after this young man? Is that seemly?" At the same time, he seized the youngest by the hand in order to pull her away, but as soon as he touched her, he likewise stuck fast, and was himself obliged to run behind. Before long, the sexton came by and saw his master, the parson, running behind 3 girls. He was astonished at this and called out, "Hi, your reverence, whither away so quickly? Do not forget that we have a christening today." And running after him, he took him by the sleeve, but was also held fast to it. Whilst the 5 were trotting thus one behind the other, 2 laborers came with their hoes from the fields. The parson called out to them and begged that they would set him and the sexton free. But they had scarcely touched the sexton when they were held fast, and now there were 7 of them running behind Dummling and the goose. Soon afterwards, he came to a city where a king ruled who had a daughter who was so serious that no one could make her laugh. So he had put forth a decree that whosoever should be able to make her laugh should marry her. When Dummling heard this, he went with his goose and all her train before the king's daughter. And as soon as she saw the 7 people running on and on, one behind the other, she began to laugh quite loudly, and as if she would never stop. Thereupon, Dummling asked to have her for his wife, but the king did not like the son-in-law, and made all manner of excuses, and said he must first produce a man who could drink a cellarful of wine. Dummling thought of the little gray man who could certainly help him, so he went into the forest, and in the same place where he had felled the tree, he saw a man sitting who had a very sorrowful face. Dummling asked him what he was taking to heart so sorely, and he answered, "I have such a great thirst and cannot quench it. Cold water I cannot stand. A barrel of wine I have just emptied, but that to me is like a drop on a hot stone." "There, I can help you," said Dummling. "Just come with me, and you shall be satisfied." He led him into the king's cellar, and the man bent over the huge barrels and drank till his loins hurt, and before the day was out, he had emptied all the barrels. Then Dummling asked once more for his bride, but the king was vexed that such an ugly fellow, whom everyone called Dummling, should take away his daughter, and he made a new condition. He must first find a man who could eat a whole mountain of bread. Dummling did not think long, but went straight into the forest, where in the same place there sat a man who was tying up his body with a strap and making an awful face and saying, "I have eaten a whole ovenful of rolls, but what good is that when one has such a hunger as I? My stomach remains empty, and I must tie myself up if I am not to die of hunger." At this, Dummling was glad and said, "Get up and come with me. You shall eat yourself full." He led him to the king's palace, where all the flour in the whole kingdom was collected, and from it he caused a huge mountain of bread to be baked. The man from the forest stood before it, began to eat, and by the end of one day the whole mountain had vanished. Then Dummling for the third time asked for his bride, but the king again sought a way out and ordered a ship which could sail on land and on water. "As soon as you come sailing back in it," said he, "you shall have my daughter for wife." Dummling went straight into the forest, and there sat the little gray man to whom he had given his cake. When he heard what Dummling wanted, he said, "Since you have given me to eat and to drink, I will give you the ship, and I do all this because you once were kind to me." Then he gave him the ship, which could sail on land and water, and when the king saw that, he could no longer prevent him from having his daughter. The wedding was celebrated, and after the king's death, Dummling inherited his kingdom and lived for a long time contentedly with his wife. There was once a king's son who had a bride whom he loved very much, and when he was sitting beside her and very happy, news came that his father lay sick unto death and desired to see him once again before his end. Then he said to his beloved, "I must now go and leave you. I give you a ring as a remembrance of me. When I am king, I will return and fetch you." So he rode away, and when he reached his father, the latter was dangerously ill and near his death. He said to him, "Dear son, I wish to see you once again before my end. Promise me to marry as I wish." And he named a certain king's daughter who was to be his wife. The son was in such trouble that he did not think what he was doing, and said, "Yes, dear father, your will shall be done." And thereupon the king shut his eyes and died. When therefore the son had been proclaimed king, and the time of mourning was over, he was forced to keep the promise which he had given his father, and caused the king's daughter to be asked in marriage, and she was promised to him. His first betrothed heard of this, and fretted so much about his faithfulness that she nearly died. Then her father said to her, "Dearest child, why are you so sad? You shall have whatsoever you will." She thought for a moment and said, "Dear father, I wish for 11 girls exactly like myself in face, figure, and size." The father said, "If it be possible, your desire shall be fulfilled." And he caused a search to be made in his whole kingdom, until 11 young maidens were found who exactly resembled his daughter in face, figure, and size. When they came to the king's daughter, she had 12 suits of huntsmen's clothes made, all alike, and the 11 maidens had to put on the huntsmen's clothes, and she herself put on the 12th suit. Thereupon she took her leave of her father, and rode away with them, and rode to the court of her former betrothed, whom she loved so dearly. Then she asked if he required any huntsmen, and if he would take all of them into his service. The king looked at her and did not know her, but as they were such handsome fellows, he said, yes, and that he would willingly take them. And now they were the king's 12 huntsmen. king, however, had a lion which was a wondrous animal, for he knew all concealed and secret things. It came to pass that one evening he said to the king, "You think you have 12 huntsmen?" "Yes," said the king, "they are 12 huntsmen." The lion continued, "You are mistaken, they are 12 girls." The king said, "That cannot be true. How will you prove that to me?" "Oh, just let some peas be strewn in the antechamber," answered the lion, "and then you will soon see. Men have a firm step, and when they walk over peas none of them stir, but girls trip and skip and drag their feet, and the peas roll about." The king was well pleased with the counsel and caused the peas to be strewn. There was, however, a servant of the king's who favored the huntsmen, and when he heard that they were going to be put to this test, he went to them and repeated everything and said, "The lion wants to make the king believe that you are girls." Then the king's daughter thanked him and said to her maidens, "Show some strength and step firmly on the peas." So next morning, when the king had the 12 huntsmen called before him, and they came into the antechamber where the peas were lying, they stepped so firmly on them and had such a strong, sure walk that not one of the peas either rolled or stirred. Then they went away again, and the king said to the lion, "You have lied to me. They walk just like men." The lion said, "They have been informed that they were going to be put to the test, and have assumed some strength. Just let 12 spinning wheels be brought into the antechamber, and they will go to them and be pleased with them. And that is what no man would do." The king liked the advice, and had the spinning wheels placed in the antechamber. But the servant, who was well disposed to the huntsmen, went to them and disclosed the project. So when they were alone, the king's daughter said to her 11 girls, "Show some constraint, and do not look round at the spinning wheels." And next morning, when the king had his 12 huntsmen summoned, they went through the antechamber and never once looked at the spinning wheels. Then the king again said to the lion, "You have deceived me, they are men, for they have not looked at the spinning wheels." The lion replied, "They have restrained themselves." The king, however, would no longer believe the lion. The 12 huntsmen always followed the king to the chase, and his liking for them continually increased. Now it came to pass that once, when they were out hunting, news came that the king's bride was approaching. When the true bride heard that, it hurt her so much that her heart was almost broken, and she fell fainting to the ground. The king thought something had happened to his dear huntsman, ran up to him, wanted to help him, and drew his glove off. Then he saw the ring which he had given to his first bride, and when he looked in her face, he recognized her. Then his heart was so touched that he kissed her, and when she opened her eyes, he said, "You are mine, and I am yours, and no one in the world can alter that." He sent a messenger to the other bride, and entreated her to return to her own kingdom, for he had a wife already, and someone who had just found an old key did not require a new one. Thereupon the wedding was celebrated, and the lion was again taken into favor, because, after all, he had told the truth long before you or I were born. There reigned, in a country a great way off, a king who had 3 sons. This king once fell very ill, so ill that nobody thought he could live. His sons were very much grieved at their father's sickness, and as they were walking together very mournfully in the garden of the palace, a little old man met them and asked what was the matter. They told him that their father was very ill and that they were afraid nothing could save him. "I know what would," said the little old man. "It is the water of life. If he could have a draught of it, he would be well again. But it is very hard to get." Then the eldest son said, "I will soon find it." And he went to the sick king and begged that he might go in search of the water of life, as it was the only thing that could save him. "No," said the king. "I had rather die than place you in such great danger as you must meet with in your journey." But he begged so hard that the king let him go, and the prince thought to himself, "If I bring my father this water, he will make me sole heir to his kingdom." Then he set out, and when he had gone on his way some time, he came to a deep valley, overhung with rocks and woods. And as he looked around, he saw standing above him on one of the rocks a little ugly dwarf with a sugarloaf cap and a scarlet cloak. And the dwarf called to him and said, "Prince, whither so fast?" "What is that to thee, you ugly imp?" said the prince haughtily, and rode on. But the dwarf was enraged at his behavior, and laid a fairy spell of ill luck upon him, so that as he rode on the mountain pass, became narrower and narrower, and at last the way was so straitened that he could not go to step forward. And when he thought to have turned his horse round and go back the way he came, he heard a loud laugh ringing round him, and found that the path was closed behind him, so that he was shut in all round. He next tried to get off his horse and make his way on foot, but again the laugh rang in his ears, and he found himself unable to move a step, and thus he was forced to abide spellbound. Meantime, the old king was lingering on in daily hope of his son's return, till at last the second son said, "Father, I will go in search of the water of life." For he thought to himself, "My brother is surely dead, and the kingdom will fall to me if I find the water." The king was at first very unwilling to let him go, but at last yielded to his wish. So he set out and followed the same road which his brother had done, and met with the same elf, who stopped him at the same spot in the mountains, saying as before, "Prince, Prince, whither so fast?" "Mind your own affairs, busybody," said the prince scornfully, and rode on. But the dwarf put the same spell upon him as he put on his elder brother, and he too was at last obliged to take up his abode in the heart of the mountains. Thus it is with proud, silly people, who think themselves above everyone else, and are too proud to ask or take advice. When the second prince had thus been gone a long time, the youngest son said he would go and search for the water of life, and trusted he should soon be able to make his father well again. So he set out, and the dwarf met him too at the same spot in the valley, among the mountains, and said, "Prince, whither so fast?" And the prince said, "I am going in search of the water of life, because my father is ill and like to die. Can you help me? Pray be kind and aid me if you can." "Do you know where it is to be found?" asked the dwarf. "No," said the prince, "I do not." "Pray tell me if you know. Then, as you have spoken to me kindly and are wise enough to seek for advice, I will tell you how and where to go. The water you seek springs from a well in an enchanted castle, and that you may be able to reach it in safety, I will give you an iron wand and 2 little loaves of bread. Strike the iron door of the castle 3 times with the wand, and it will open. 2 hungry lions will be lying down inside, gaping for their prey. but if you throw them the bread, they will let you pass. Then hasten on to the well, and take some of the water of life before the clock strikes 12, for if you tarry longer, the door will shut upon you forever." Then the prince thanked his little friend with the scarlet cloak for his friendly aid, and took the wand and the bread, and went traveling on and on, over sea and over land, till he came to his journey's end, and found everything to be as the dwarf had told him. The door flew open at the third stroke of the wand, and when the lions were quieted, he went on through the castle, and came at length to a beautiful hall. Around it he saw several knights sitting in a trance. Then he pulled off their rings, and put them on his own fingers. In another room he saw on a table a sword and a loaf of bread, which he also took. Further on he came to a room where a beautiful young lady sat upon a couch, and she welcomed him joyfully, and said if he would set her free from the spell that bound her, the kingdom should be his, if he would come back in a year and marry her. Then she told him that the well that held the water of life was in the palace gardens, and bade him make haste and draw what he wanted before the clock struck 12. He walked on, and as he walked through beautiful gardens, he came to a delightful shady spot in which stood a couch, and he thought to himself, as he felt tired, that he would rest himself for a while and gaze on the lovely scenes around him. So he laid himself down, and sleep fell upon him unawares, so that he did not wake up till the clock was striking 12:15. Then he sprang from the couch, dreadfully frightened, ran to the well, filled a cup that was standing by him full of water, and hastened to get away in time. Just as he was going out of the iron door, it struck 12, and the door fell so quickly upon him that it snapped off a piece of his heel. When he found himself safe, he was overjoyed to think that he had got the water of life, and as he was going on his way homewards, he passed by the little dwarf, who, when he saw the sword and the loaf, said, "You have made a noble prize. With the sword you can at a blow slay whole armies, and the bread will never fail you." Then the prince thought to himself, "I cannot go home to my father without my brothers." So he said, "My dear friend, cannot you tell me where my 2 brothers are, who set out in search of the water of life before me, and never came back? I have shut them up by a charm between 2 mountains," said the dwarf, "because they were proud and ill-behaved, and scorned to ask advice." The prince begged so hard for his brothers that the dwarf at last set them free, though unwillingly, saying, "Beware of them, for they have bad hearts." Their brother, however, was greatly rejoiced to see them, and told them all that had happened to him, how he had found the water of life, and had taken a cup full of it, and how he had set a beautiful princess free from a spell that bound her, and how she had engaged to wait a whole year, and then to marry him, and to give him the kingdom. Then they all 3 rode on together, and on their way home came to a country that was laid waste by war and a dreadful famine, so that it was feared all must die for want. But the prince gave the king of the land the bread, and all his kingdom ate of it. And he lent the king the wonderful sword, and he slew the enemy's army with it. And thus the kingdom was once more in peace and plenty. In the same manner, he befriended 2 other countries through which they passed on their way. When they came to the sea, they got into a ship, and during their voyage the 2 eldest said to themselves, "Our brother has got the water which we could not find. Therefore our father will forsake us and give him the kingdom, which is our right." So they were full of envy and revenge and agreed together how they could ruin him. Then they waited till he was fast asleep and poured the water of life out of the cup and took it for themselves, giving him bitter seawater instead. When they came to their journey's end, the youngest son brought his cup to the sick king, that he might drink and be healed. Scarcely, however, had he tasted the bitter seawater when he became worse even than he was before. And then both the elder sons came in and blamed the youngest for what they had done, and said that he wanted to poison their father, but that they had found the water of life and had brought it with them. He no sooner began to drink of what they brought him than he felt his sickness leave him, and was as strong and well as in his younger days. Then they went to their brother and laughed at him, and said, "Well, brother, you found the water of life, did you? You have had the trouble, and we shall have the reward. Pray, with all your cleverness, why did not you manage to keep your eyes open? Next year, one of us will take away your beautiful princess, if you do not take care. You had better say nothing about this to our father, for he does not believe a word you say, and if you tell tales, you shall lose your life into the bargain. But be quiet, and we will let you off." The old king was still very angry with his youngest son, and thought that he really meant to have taken away his life. So he called his court together and asked what should be done, and all agreed that he ought to be put to death. The prince knew nothing of what was going on till one day, when the king's chief huntsman went hunting with him, and they were alone in the wood together. The huntsman looked so sorrowful that the prince said, "My friend, what is the matter with you?" "I cannot and dare not tell you," said he. But the prince begged very hard and said, "Only tell me what it is, and do not think I shall be angry, for I will forgive you." "Alas," said the huntsman, "the king has ordered me to shoot you." The prince started at this and said, "Let me live, and I will change dresses with you. You shall take my royal coat to show to my father, and do you give me your shabby one." "With all my heart," said the huntsman. "I am sure I shall be glad to save you, for I could not have shot you." Then he took the prince's coat and gave him the shabby one and went away through the wood. Some time after, 3 grand embassies came to the old king's court, with rich gifts of gold and precious stones for his youngest son. Now all these were sent from the 3 kings, to whom he had lent his sword and loaf of bread, in order to rid them of their enemy and feed their people. This touched the old king's heart, and he thought his son might still be guiltless, and said to his court, "Oh, that my son were still alive! How it grieves me that I had him killed." "He is still alive," said the huntsman, "and I am glad that I had pity on him, but let him go in peace," and brought home his royal coat. At this, the king was overwhelmed with joy, and made it known throughout all his kingdom that if his son would come back to his court, he would forgive him. Meanwhile, the princess was eagerly waiting till her deliverer should come back, and had a road made leading up to her palace, all of shining gold, and told her courtiers that whoever came on horseback and rode straight up to the gate upon it was her true lover, and that they must let him in. But whoever rode on one side of it, they must be sure was not the right one, and that they must send him away at once. The time soon came when the eldest brother thought that he would make haste to go to the princess, and say that he was the one who had set her free, and that he should have her for his wife, and the kingdom with her. As he came before the palace and saw the golden road, he stopped to look at it, and he thought to himself, "It is a pity to ride upon this beautiful road." So he turned aside and rode on the right-hand side of it. But when he came to the gate, the guards, who had seen the road he took, said to him, he could not be what he said he was, and must go about his business. The second prince set out soon afterwards on the same errand, and when he came to the golden road and his horse had set one foot upon it, he stopped to look at it, and thought it very beautiful, and said to himself, "What a pity it is that anything should tread here." Then he too turned aside and rode on the left side of it. But when he came to the gate, the guards said he was not the true prince, and that he too must go away about his business. And away he went. Now, when the full year was come round, the third brother left the forest, in which he had lain hid for fear of his father's anger, and set out in search of his betrothed bride. So he journeyed on, thinking of her all the way, and rode so quickly that he did not even see what the road was made of, but went with his horse straight over it. And as he came to the gate, it flew open, and the princess welcomed him with joy, and said he was her deliverer, and should now be her husband and lord of the kingdom. When the first joy at their meeting was over, the princess told him she had heard of his father having forgiven him, and of his wish to have him home again. So, before his wedding with the princess, he went to visit his father, taking her with him. Then he told him everything, how his brothers had cheated and robbed him, and yet that he had borne all those wrongs for the love of his father. And the old king was very angry, and wanted to punish his wicked sons. But they made their escape and got into a ship, and sailed away over the wide sea, and where they went to nobody knew and nobody cared. And now the old king gathered together his court, and asked all his kingdom to come and celebrate the wedding of his son and the princess. And young and old, noble and squire, gentle and simple, came at once on the summons, and among the rest came the friendly dwarf with the sugarloaf hat and a new scarlet cloak. And the wedding was held, and the merry bells run, and all the good people they danced, and they sung, and feasted and frolicked, I can't tell how long.